Llévate más de lo que esperas todos los días con el nuevo McValue en McDonald's. Ahora puedes comprar uno y sumarle otro por $1. Así que cuando tu equipo favorito enfrente a sus rivales, enfrenta tus antojos con $5 Meal Deals. Y si estás corriendo para alcanzar el desayuno, corre a la app para llevarte ofertas antes del cutoff. Tú decides, y con McValue, tu decisión siempre rinde más. Precios y participación pueden variar. BOGO $1 válido para un producto de igual o menor valor. Debe estar registrado en Rewards para ofertas en el app.
Today on CityCast Houston, I don't need to tell you that it's been a cold week here in H-Town, but it's been extra hard for vulnerable Houstonians living on the streets or who don't have stable housing. So I'm bringing on my friend Patricia Olivares, a public policy advocate who spent nights on the street herself to bring awareness to the issue. Plus, Houston Landing's diverse communities reporter Monique Welch shares her latest story about an overlooked program that's actually helping Black women stay safe and healthy during their pregnancies. Plus, did you know Houston could sell its excess water to West Texas? Oh yeah, you'll definitely want to hear that one. It's Friday, January 10th. I'm Raheel Ramzanali, and here's what Houston's talking about. Happy Friday, y'all. Welcome in. Patricia, how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you?
I'm doing all right. You know, it's been a cold week, but hopefully some warmer weather is on the way, and we're going to talk about that shortly. Monique, what's up? How are you?
Doing good. Like you said, I'm freezing, but I'm looking forward to the weekend to warm up a little bit.
Oh, come on. You grew up with colder weather, right?
I know, but how long ago was that? I'm not used to this anymore.
Hey, let's get to our biggest story of the week. And without a doubt, the big story in Houston this week was the cold weather and the polar vortex that's been impacting so many of us. And while things were much milder than expected here in Houston, that wasn't the case for Houston's unhoused community because the city didn't open warming shelters since the temps didn't meet this threshold that they have of 24 degrees, which it sounds crazy, right? 24 degrees is when they open up warming centers. But because of the lack of warming shelters, a man was found dead in the East End in a Metro bus shelter following the freezing temperatures on Monday. And Patricia, you've been advocating and urging the city to open warming shelters when the temperatures were in the 40s. And you did this by going out and spending several nights on the street just to show how hard it is for the unhoused community to survive these cold temperatures. And that was in the 40s. Tell me about that.
Yeah, for sure. This was back in early December, end of November. I spent a couple of nights out on the street because I had heard that the warming centers had not been open. And so I was just kind of flabbergasted by that. You know, I could not imagine making humans sleep out in this weather, especially when we live in such a large, diverse city. We're Space City, we're the epicenter of oil and gas. So there is no reason why, we should not be able to open up these centers and fund them appropriately and staff them. I can't even describe it. I can't even describe how much I learned. I think one of the biggest things, and I keep hearing this again, and I've actually heard it from the Mayor John Whitmire, is that people don't want to come in off the street. And let me tell you, that is the hugest misconception. That is so not true. I spent some time not just in one part of town, so I went to several different communities and got to speak to several different groups of unhoused people. And everybody told me that they wanted off the streets. They said, they tell us to go get resources. They tell us, to go here and there. And when you show up, there isn't enough funding and they can't help you. So they turn you away.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just curious from you, like, what was that like? How long were you out there? And what are some of the things you heard?
Stories of survival. I mean, so I was out there for about a week. I went out on Monday and thought that I would only do one night, and then maybe that might solicit a response from people that I knew. I worked in Houston politics for a long time. I've worked at the national, state, and local level. In 2023, I ran for Houston City Council. So many of the people that are on City Council now, including the mayor, I campaigned alongside in 2023, and I had many private conversations both personally and professionally with some of these candidates and talking about what they wanted to do for the city of Houston. So for me now to see them be in office and do nothing about the unhoused issue is just really disappointing. So, like I said, I thought I would spend one night out there. That did not solicit a response from anybody. And I was quite surprised by that. I was like, some of these people are my friends and nobody is like sending me text messages.
And I want to pause you there, Patricia, real quickly. When you mean by friends, like you were posting updates on your personal and public Facebook pages, just telling people that, hey, I am spending the night and here's what our unhoused community is going through. And when you mean by friends, like these political figures, people in power are your friends on Facebook. So there's a chance they're seeing these updates.
Oh yeah, for sure. Oh yeah, they saw them. They saw them. Not just that. I mean, these are people that I often talk to regularly. But yeah, all of them saw it, and nobody reached out to me, and that's what's really disappointing because that's what really disenfranchises voters. When you vote for people and they tell you that they're going to do one thing, and then they get into the office, and then they just completely, just do nothing about it. So like I said, I spent Monday, I came back in for 2 days. So I ended up going back out on a Wednesday night. By the third night, I could really notice a change in myself because you're not just battling the elements, you're also constantly aware of your surroundings, especially if you're a woman and you're living on the streets. Safety, is a number one priority. I've served in combat. I would describe it as fight or flight.
Wow.
You're in that fight or flight mode and you're constantly watching out because there's so many dangers, not just from strangers, but also from governmental agencies. For example, law enforcement. Either you're being criminalized for being poor and for just existing, and they call it public camping. And I'm like, that is such a disservice. You know what I mean? To minimize it in that way. No one is out there camping, for fun.
So there are several organizations that help with the unhoused communities, right? Nonprofits that are out there providing warming shelters when the city isn't. Did you run into anybody offering, shelter space when you were out on the streets at that time?
So no. So there are two groups that do a lot of work with the unhoused community, and that's Food Not Bonds and the Robin Hood Project. These are just private individuals that, do this all on their own, get food together, get warm clothes together and hand it out and stuff. But the issue right now is that the shelters are to capacity or don't have enough resources or funding. So, for example, if you are a woman with family, you might get taken in on a walk-in basis. If you're anybody else, you will get put on a wait list or that you will get told that there is no space. Mayor Whitmire said when it came to the unhoused man that passed away here in the second ward, he said that that gentleman had been offered shelter and that he refused it. I said, absolutely not true. Where would he have taken him? There is no space.
So, Patricia, how did you know exactly that he wasn't offered a shelter space?
So I have a friend who is a homeless advocate. She's done a lot of work in that space. And so she reached out to me and she was the one that told me, she's like, they were not in the East End asking people to go into shelters. And so that's how I got that information. And a woman in the community reached out to me because she saw my post and she said the gentleman that passed away, that she had seen him earlier that night. She had seen him in the evening and she had seen him trying his best to keep himself warm, and she felt so bad, she felt so helpless that she couldn't do much. And it just made her really sad to realize that when she woke up that morning and checked Facebook, that had been the same man that she had seen the night prior.
That is so heartbreaking to hear. And in the past couple of years, Houston has won a lot of praise about how they are solving the unhoused community crisis, right? Getting people off the street, changing their lives. And we even did an episode on it. but it seems like we're moving backwards. Hearing your stories, when I drive around on a Sunday in downtown, all of the bridges, underneath, you see the tent camps pop up again. Those were gone for a while, but are we moving backwards? Like when you're talking to people who are working on this issue and talking to the unhoused community, does it seem like we're moving backwards now?
Yeah, absolutely, especially with some of our elected officials. I was surprised. My aunt sent me a news article about Governor Abbott, and he had actually requested that most counties actually open up their warming centers, right? So that was a surprise to me, just because of the history that the governor has with the unhoused community and stuff. And for some reason, our local democratically elected mayor is choosing not to do that. And you cannot put a number on people. This threshold about it has to be 24 degrees and the wind chill has to be like 15 degrees or something like that for 2 hours. We had a human die. So it's like that should be the threshold, right? Where it's like enough's enough.
Mm-hmm. By the way, last year, at least 5 people died from January 15th and 16th when we had that really below freezing cold weather move into Harris County. So I want to put that out there as well.
Yeah.
And one last thing, while we're talking about this intense weather, I am thinking about all of our friends in Los Angeles and in California that are dealing with the fires. I know there are a lot of Houstonians who have moved there, and seems like everyone has a story or a friend or a family member that has been impacted by those fires. So we are definitely thinking about you and just, hoping that things improve there in Los Angeles.
For sure. Yeah, our hearts are definitely with them. That's tough what they're going through.
Monique, let's get to your big story. What do you got for us?
Yeah, I want to switch gears a little bit. We all know that Inauguration Day is coming up soon, where President-elect Donald Trump will take office. And, as we see with pretty much every new role, new president, there's a
Mhm.
lot of changes and turnovers. And right, we're seeing that here in Houston. Houston U.S. Attorney Alamdar Hamdani, he recently announced he was resigning Wednesday, just after 2 years on the job. And he's a top federal prosecutor for the Southern District of Texas, if you're not aware. But his resignation will take effect on January 19th. Of course, that's just one day before Inauguration Day. And in an interview with the Houston Landing Tuesday, he said he's unaware of his next steps, but did speak to how common that it is for U.S. attorneys to be asked to resign whenever a new administration takes office, especially if they were appointed by a president of the opposite party.
Yeah.
And so this is something we're seeing, not just in Houston, but just across the U.S. Attorneys in Massachusetts, California, Florida, and Hawaii also have announced their intent to step down. And so this
Oh,
is a
wow.
big one because, he was the first Asian American to hold the position. And by his own self evaluation, has accomplished much of what he set out to do when he first took office back in December 2022. Some of that is lowering the Houston's murder rate. State data shows that it dropped about 20% in his first year of office. Combat violent crime, prioritize public corruption, national security, white collar crime, you name it, drug cases, fentanyl. So definitely had a huge impact in his short 2 years. So now I guess we'll just wait and see who Trump will appoint.
Yeah. Any word on who Trump will appoint in that role and fill those big shoes? Because it sounds like he did a great job.
Yeah, I mean, for sure. It's unclear at the moment who will be acting U.S. attorney until Trump names a successor. So we'll have to just kind of wait and see with that one. But definitely, he spoke to Houston's diversity. So I hope at least, fingers crossed, we'll still have someone that represents Houston's diversity, just
Yeah.
like we all know.
Yeah, another domino falling, right, in terms of national politics impacting what happens here locally, right?
Oh, yeah.
So we'll be watching on who his successor is going to be and, of course, tracking how they do here and impacting our city.
Yeah. I think it's an example of, a lot of times when elections come, and especially big elections where we're electing a president, a lot of times people say, oh, it doesn't matter, or that's not going to affect me. This is a prime example of how the president's race will affect us here locally.
Absolutely. One
Yeah.
of the things I always say, having served in the military, is that, A lot of people will, come up to me and be like, thank you for your service and shake my hand. And I always let them know, if you want to thank me for my service, make sure not only that you vote, but that you vote all the way down ballot, because elections do have consequences.
Absolutely. That is good advice right there. Life and Death on the Border 1910 to 1920 is now on view at Holocaust Museum Houston from January 24th to May 25th. This groundbreaking exhibition is produced by the Bullock Texas State History Museum in collaboration with Refusing to Forget, and it explores a decade of hardship, conflict, and state-sanctioned violence along the Texas border that threatened to destroy a community. But this decade also led to a cultural renaissance along the border and beyond, and it inspired the Mexican-American civil rights movement. Life and Death on the Border 1910 to 1920 will be on view in Holocaust Museum Houston's Joseph and Edith Mintzberg Gallery, January 24th through May 25th. Admission is always free for ages 18 and under and college students with a valid school ID, and it's also free to everyone Thursdays from 2 p.m. to 5 p.m. Learn more at hmh.org/lifeanddeath. The Museum of Fine Arts Houston presents Living with the Gods, Arts, Beliefs, and Peoples. To celebrate its centennial, the museum has organized a once-in-a-lifetime exhibition that features extraordinary objects made by artists to communicate with their gods. Living with the Gods represents a vast array of religions and beliefs, with art created across cultures and across thousands of years. The 200 objects demonstrate the astonishing quality that artists have achieved when driven by passion and faith. Living with the Gods is on view from October 27th through January 20th, 2025. Visit mfah.org/livingwiththegods to learn more. That's mfah.org/livingwiththegods. All right, let's get to our most overlooked stories of the week. I will kick this one off, and we're going to hear a lot about Mayor Whitmire and his connection to Texas lawmakers after all his time in Austin. And the first big deal that could benefit Houston might happen this legislative session. This was a totally overlooked story for me, but Governor Abbott and Mayor Whitmire are in discussions right now to sell Houston's excess water to West Texas in exchange for state funding to fix our city's crippling infrastructure, which is in such bad shape that it leaked an estimated 36 billion gallons of water. Now, it's going to take $15 billion to fix, right? All these old pipes and water processing centers. But this could be the first big deal that is struck between Mayor Whitmire and Texas.
Man, that's making a deal with the devil. It's like we have our own water issues here in the city, right? Yes, there's infrastructure, but there's also access to water. And so like selling it off just does not seem like the right move. And then, once you accept funding from the state, that's going to come with lots of restrictions. It's going to come at a price, and I think the city of Houston needs to be very careful.
Yeah, I mean, just off the top of my head, my first question is this what it has come to? Are we getting this desperate? Is this who we are as a city? It's kind of premature, but it's like, what's the cost? And there's going to be a cost of this, like you said. I mean, I don't know. The cost is what I'm most worried about, is how is this going to affect us long term rather than just getting the cash?
Yeah, and what happens, right? Because this is excess water, right? So this is going to be the extra stuff that we're not using in reservoirs and all that good stuff. But what happens in a drought? What if we go through a historical drought or a summer where the heat is so hot, like that heat dome a couple of years ago, and there is no excess water? Like, will they renege on that deal? Are they going to say, no, actually, now we can't give you funding for this right now? Like, what's going to happen? There's just so much at play. And I do want to point this out. Now, this isn't the first time that the city has done this. In 2019, lawmakers passed a bill forcing Houston to sell its rights to water in a proposed Allens Creek reservoir for $23 million. But that project is still years away from being completed. So there is that as well. And yeah, I mean, this is going out to West Texas where they need it desperately. And Governor Abbott has talked about how this is one of the big things he's focusing on is the water shortage, and that he doesn't want the state to be in any situation where the residents don't have water. So that is a story that caught my eye. I was like, wow, nobody's talking about this, but it is something we'll be watching out for. Monique, what is your most overlooked story?
Yeah, mine is actually a special report that I've been working on this for months. And if anyone knows me, I'm pretty passionate about the state of Houston's Black maternal health. It's been a big issue. It's not a new issue. It's a hot topic that many have talked about before. But for me, what seemed to be missing from a lot of the coverage was just the focus on midwives and Black midwives, particularly, and their role in helping to solve this issue. So, just a bit of context in case you aren't aware, Black patients are more than 3 times more likely to die from pregnancy related complications than their white counterparts. And that's due to a number of factors, not just one, but typically it pertains to quality health care,
Ah,
underlying chronic conditions, structural racism, implicit bias, you name it. The list goes on. This is all from the CDC.
Mhm.
But the CDC also says that more than 80% of those pregnancy related deaths were preventable. I kind of wanted to peel back the layers, and I'm like, okay, who behind the scenes is doing this work, you know? And so I connected with Deshawn Desrosers. She's a former Army veteran who started Hermania's birthing in 2018, first as a doula, and then she became a licensed midwife in 2023. And it was all based on her own traumatic experience where she flatlined due to a cesarean.
wow.
And a lot of those reasons of just feeling ignored, racism essentially, and just some implicit bias that she dealt with in a hospital setting. So I love this just because she used her personal experience to make good change and impact in her community for it. And now she's one of few Black midwives in the Houston area who is addressing those disparities that we see among Black women by
Yeah.
providing a safe and holistic alternative for those who may be, looking for a different option, or maybe they've been in similar shoes and they want to try something different. So, story really delves into kind of the history of midwives and just some of the data that's out there that proves it as a safe alternative. A lot of times there are a lot of myths that,
Yeah.
oh, it's not safe, it's not this, but actually studies published in the National Library of Medicine show that midwifery care has generally led to better outcomes for birthing parents, and particularly Black people. In low risk pregnancies, midwifery has been associated with decreased labor interventions, decreased cesareans, preterm births, and operative vaginal births, with no increased odds of neonatal intensive care or
Wow.
severe maternal morbidity. A lot of times, we focus on the deaths, but there are a lot of almost cases, right, where something could have went wrong, and that's what we classify as maternal morbidity.
You know, it's crazy. You talked about the benefits of midwives, and Texas Children's Hospital laid off its midwife program with recent cuts, right? And layoffs. So it's like, what do you do when something so valuable is out there? But on your story, as I was reading it, and it was a great story, by the way, kudos to you.
Thank you.
I want to ask you a question about code switching, because that was one thing that
Yeah.
stood out to me that a lot of people don't know about. What exactly is code switching, and why is it important when it comes to midwives helping the Black community?
Yeah, I'm so glad you said that. Actually, it's the question I've been getting ever since the story published a lot. I'm guilty of this myself. Code switching essentially is you kind of when you put on a mask, right? You're around maybe white counterparts or um, any community that is not your own community. So
Hmm.
you can't really let your hair down. You might use slang, if you're friends and family, but when you're around your white coworkers, you have your
Gotcha.
professional voice on, air quotes. So it's anytime you kind of go back and forth, you change up your language, your style, you kind of mask your cultural identity. A lot of people said it's a way to kind of protect your cultural identity as well. It's not always this negative thing. Sometimes it's, you preserve that for when you feel comfortable.
So just being able to speak with somebody, one Black woman talking to a Black midwife can make that care that much better, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to code switch would help in this situation.
Yeah, well, you also don't have to explain. Some things you just understand. You innately share similar experiences. Deshawn talked to me about how in her consultation she goes over a lot of like social and economic factors that maybe just a doctor or OB-GYN may not ask, like their transportation. That can affect, their access to quality care. If they maybe have another child in daycare or they're a single mother already, or
Wow.
reasons why they may be late to an appointment, or, different things, different barriers,
Yeah,
getting all those social factors and realizing how that can contribute to a person's quality of care.
that makes sense. If you want to read Monique's story, I've linked it in our show notes. It is a great read, so I highly, highly recommend it. All of your work is great, but this one really stood out to me, and it's such a powerful story. Patricia, let's get to your most overlooked story. What do you got?
Yeah, sure. So the Houston Chronicle did a story this past week on a Midtown agency that received $22 million in funding. It goes along with what we were talking about earlier about the unhoused community. So the city gave a Midtown agency this TERS. And for those of you that don't know what TERS are, they are redevelopment authority zones, basically where part of the taxes are kept in that area. They don't go towards citywide spending. They stay in the area and are used for redevelopment. Well, this Midtown agency received $22 million that were earmarked for affordable housing and instead chose to build, ding, 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 a parking garage.
Ugh, a parking
A
garage?
parking garage and an office building. And so, again, it's like that's why we have issues. That's why we have people, that cannot afford housing. I mean, something as simple as housing is starting to become out of reach for most people. People are having to work 2 and 3 jobs. But going back to the story, and so now it's, will the city hold them accountable? And I hope so. I hope that there are some repercussions because we can't just be giving this money out to anybody and then not doing what they were supposed to do with it.
In that Houston Chronicle investigation, you mentioned they built this complex that was, pretty much all office space and the garage. And they did have 20 affordable apartments attached to this project. But if they had spent all that money on just affordable housing, they could have built 72 apartments. And there are actually emails which show city attorneys repeatedly saying that the tower and the garage were not, quote, providing affordable housing, end quote, as state law requires. Like, there's evidence. Like, I hope people are held accountable for this. This is so frustrating, and this is why people lose trust in elected officials.
Exactly. Yeah. I believe, here in Houston and Harris County, we're a largely Democratic county.
Yeah.
This past election cycle, Democrats lost 100,000 voters. 13% of Latinos shifted to the right. And this is exactly why.
Yeah, I mean, this is so absurd, but to me, I mean, everything is absurd about it, but the most absurd thing to me was its justification. I mean, they literally, I was reading the story and they were like, oh, this would be this Houston central clearinghouse for like everything related to affordable housing. And I'm like, what does that even mean?
Yeah,
Like,
like you're
Yeah.
just
a
throwing terms out there.
clearinghouse? This is how you're justifying 22 million. I
Ugh.
mean, it doesn't get any more absurd than that to me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The whole investigation is fascinating. There's a lot to read in it, so definitely check that one out and learn more about that story.
Will, talk to me.
ABC Tuesday.
They took his daughter. She's coming home alive.
Will Trent, the series critics are calling powerful must-see TV, continues to thrill.
Shouldn't we strategize before we go in there?
If we screw up this case, a cop killer walks free.
With the riveting conclusion to a 2-part season premiere.
GBI!
Help me!
Get down!
Will Trent, all new Tuesday on ABC and stream on Hulu.
This episode is brought to you by LifeLock. The new year brings new health goals and wealth goals. Protecting your identity is an important step. LifeLock monitors millions of data points per second. If your identity is stolen, LifeLock's restoration specialist will fix it, guaranteed or your money back. Resolve to make identity health and wealth part of your New Year's goals with LifeLock. Save up to 40% your first year. Visit LifeLock.com/podcast. Terms apply.
Okay, let's get to our moment of joy. It's been a long week, so let's end on a high note. Patricia, kick it off.
Yeah, for sure. So going back to, spending a couple of nights out on the street, one of the nights that I was staying out in a park, I got to meet this gentleman. And I got to know his story, and we talked a little bit about issues related to the homeless community. Didn't think much of it. We talked. He goes his way, I go mine. The next morning, he shows back up to the park. And he tells me, he goes, hey, I went to go work at this local taco shop, and they gave me some food and a couple of dollars. He's like, I want to give you a taco and stuff. And I just thought that was just the most amazing thing. I thought it was the kindest thing ever, right? Here I am, somebody that does have resources, right? And here's somebody who doesn't, but he still went out of his way to give something back to me. And so, I mean, that is the epitome of the unhoused community here in Houston. And so I would just ask people that when they do see our unhoused community, is just to maybe not judge them so harshly, because there really are some kind people out there.
That's amazing to hear. What a beautiful story and compassionate story, right? And really speaks to the Houston spirit. No matter where you are in your life, that Houston spirit is still strong. I love hearing that.
Yeah.
Monique, what was your moment of joy?
Yeah, I love that as well. But speaking of Houston spirit, my moment of joy was a recent feature that my colleague Jose Luis Martinez published, and it's all about Houston's modified truck culture. As we all know, I'm not a native Houstonian, but this is a part of Houston that I love and I cherish. It's truck culture, really, just it's car culture in general. Rodeo's coming up, and always look forward to like the reminder of the slab culture. So whether you love them or whether you hate them, like this is a part of Houston's culture. It always has been for decades. And I'm talking about, of course, when I say modified trucks, those low riding, smooth pickup trucks where the suspension is slightly lowered and the behemoth monster trucks with, all the elaborate painting on the body, the squatted trucks, you name it. I love it all. So whether you're a new Houstonian, longtime Houstonian, this is Houston culture. So this story kind of just showcased a bunch of different exquisite trucks and featuring this longtime Houston Car Club, Latin Image, which I hadn't heard of, but I learned a lot about it. And they had trucks that were decked out in Christmas themed.
Awesome.
I'm in this mode of like not trying to relinquish the holiday season. So I love that. It shows you the creativity that Houston really has become known for. So I love it.
You got the truck culture, then you got the slabs, you got the candy paint.
Right.
We've seen the Houston Texans wear candy paint, red helmets, which really like speaks to our city's culture. So I love it. I've been pushing my wife. I was like, one day I'm going to get a slab. Like I'm going to put some 24s on it. I'm just going to, when I'm retired, I'm just going to go ahead and just drive slow.
I love
and
that.
enjoy my time.
I feel like I have to put in some more years before I can graduate to that, but I think you've got it, Raheel.
Thank you. I love our city and I love our culture and so many different ways to celebrate it. My moment of joy is about a Houston company and it's Fury Fighting Championship. So for those of you who don't know, I do play-by-play for Fury Fighting Championship, which is an MMA organization that broadcasts on UFC Fight Pass. And this Sunday is actually one of our big pay-per-views. It's Fury Fighting 100. Now, the reason I'm bringing up this story is that because it's a Houston business started by President Eric Garcia, and he's helped so many local Houston fighters change their lives. Now, I don't know if y'all know this, but on the local fighting scene, some of these guys are working 2 jobs, 3 jobs, just trying to make it. There's not much money in the local fighting scene. But with Fury, since they partnered up with the UFC, they've become the #1 feeder for the UFC, sending so many Houstonians to the UFC where now they're making life-changing money, and it is incredible to see them perform on the worldwide stage. Like one guy, Josh Fan, this kid who immigrated here, he was an amateur 3 years ago when I first started calling fights. And in that time, he went from an amateur to winning our 125 belt, which is the 125-pound division. And now he's in the UFC making life-changing money. So it's a beautiful story of a Houston business doing great things. And Fury FC 100 is this weekend. I've called over 500 fights, and I was just reminiscing about that.
Oh, wow.
It's wild.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So kudos to Fury Fighting Championship and congratulations to all of the Houston fighters. What a weekend it's going to be. Y'all, that was so much fun to talk and catch up and hear about your experiences, Patricia, and the great story that you've been working on, Monique. And have a great weekend. Stay warm. And thank you again for joining us.
Of course.
Of course. Thank you.
That was Houston Landing's diverse communities reporter Monique Welch and public policy advocate Patricia Olivares. You can read all of the stories we discussed in our show notes. Before we wrap it up for the week, if you haven't shared an episode with a friend, please do that now and help us grow the show. You can also rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. Thanks. That will do it for this week here on CityCast Houston. Our producer is Carleon Jones. Our newsletter editor is Brooke Lewis. Our executive producer is Laura Eisensee. And I'm your host, Raheel Ramzanali. Our music is by the band All the Kimonos. We'll be back on Monday with a special episode previewing the upcoming Texas legislative session. Thank you for listening, and I hope you learned something new.
I mean, I think as an example, oftentimes you hear people who say, I'm just start over just in case.